been looking at the word mystic. And perhaps you'll remember that story about the young man who heard that Mullah Nasruddin was a very great mystic. So he decided to follow him around and see what a mystic did. So as he was observing the Mullah, he saw him go under a tree and sit down and put out his hand. And in a moment there was a dripping glass goblet of sweet nectar in his hand. And then he held out his other hand, and there was a delicious plate of halwa. The sweet smell could even be smelt by the young man in his hiding place. The young man could hardly wait. Rushed up to the Mullah and he said, "Mullah, Mullah, will you teach me? Will you teach me to be a mystic?" And the Mullah said, "Oh yes, I can teach you to be a mystic," but he said, "You'll have to pass a test or an initiation. Are you willing?" "Oh yes," said the young man. "Well," said the Mullah, "do you want the hard question or the easy question?" The young man said, "Oh, the hard one." The Mullah said, "Well, how do you make a hole in your fence big enough for your chickens to go and peck in your neighbor's yard, but too small for their chickens to come and peck in your yard?" So the young man scratched his head and hung his head in shame. Mullah said, "Should have asked for the easy one." But then the young man just went off down the path, quite perplexed and ashamed really. And the Mullah went off the other way, smiling to himself, thinking, "There goes a budding mystic." And perhaps you'll remember this story too. And you might scratch your head and say, what has it got to do with being a mystic? But you know how these stories are. They have their way. And it's that story about when wisdom and luck met at a crossroads, and they got into a very, very serious debate about who was the most powerful. Now wisdom said, "With me, anything is possible in life." Luck said, "An ounce of luck is worth 100 pounds of wisdom. You can't do anything without me." Well, this debate went on, but of course, somewhere in the world, a child was born at that moment. So it was decided that one of them would enter this child and they would see who was the most powerful. So as it happened, it was wisdom who entered the young boy who was born. And this boy was born to a very, very poor family. And the father died and left a widow who didn't even have enough money to have her son educated. But he was a very, very bright lad. Could be seen from the earliest age that he had great potential. So when he was about 14 or 15 years old, when he was in town one day, the local goldsmith invited him to come and be his apprentice. So it wasn't long before the lad had learned all the ways of goldsmithing. In fact, he even surpassed his own teacher. So, being a little bit dissatisfied with this, the young man decided that he would go off and seek his fortune in the capital city where the king resided. So he went off to the city and he approached a tailor who happened to be the tailor of the king and asked could he learn his trade. Well, before very long he was designing clothes and making them for the king, who of course was just delighted with this creativity, and so the king asked, who is me? And well, of course, the tailor claimed it for himself, didn't he? Said, oh, it's me. So the king rewarded the tailor handsomely. But then it so happened that a town crier came out, because in the palace, the princess, the daughter of the king, had come to a marriageable age. But she was very choosy about her husband. She said, I'm not going to marry anyone who is less clever than me. So she said, you invite possible suitors, and if they can make me talk, respond, I'll marry them. But if they don't, they'll have their heads lopped. So many suitors came along to claim her hand, and many had their head lopped. But the young man heard of this, and he said, I can make her talk. So he presented himself to the palace, and when they saw him in his very poor garb, of course, this fellow's got no chance, but of course they were all welcome. So he was taken into the presence of the princess, and there were servants there to witness. So, but instead of greeting the princess, the young man noticed that there was a candelabra up there. He addressed himself to the candelabra. He said, oh, good afternoon, candelabra. He said, I've got a question to ask of you. He said, there were 3 men, a wood carver, a tailor, and a teacher, and things weren't too good in their town, so they decided that they would all take off to try to find their fortunes elsewhere. But when they were on the road, it came to a night time, and they found themselves in a very thick forest. So they decided that they should each take a turn being on duty. So they pulled straws, and it turned out that it was the wood carver's first shift. He had a couple of hours. So, to while away the time, he noticed that there was a rather nice piece of wood lying close to where they were encamped. So he took out his whittling knife and he began to whittle. And he whittled the form of this beautiful girl. But he'd just finished his job when it was time for him to wake up the tailor. Well, when the tailor woke up and noticed this beautiful naked piece of wood there, he thought to himself, oh well, I'll take up my needle and thread, and he had bolts of his cloth there, so he started to sew, and he made a beautiful garment for her. And just as he was finishing it off, it was time to wake up the teacher. So when the teacher sat up and he saw this beautiful maiden, he talked to her. She didn't answer. He thought to himself, well, I'll just have to teach her to talk. So he spent the next 2 hours, and indeed he did. He was so patient and so clever, he made this beautiful being speak. So when the 3 of them woke up in the morning, of course there was this beautiful maiden, and they all claimed her. No, she's mine. I carved her. No, she's mine. I made. No, she's mine. So they candelabra. Which one of these 3 do you think she belongs to? The princess couldn't help herself. Oh, she belongs to the one who made her speak. But you know what? The servants had gone to sleep and they didn't So they led him off down to the chopping block and were about to lop his head. Well, at this moment, Luck stood and he said, "See what you've done. See what you've done? Now," he said, "after all of this cleverness and all of this wisdom, see what you've done? Now let me take over." And at that very moment, the princess came out of her balcony and looked over to see the young man with the chopping block about to descend on his head. "No, stop, 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 that's the man I'm going to marry. He's the one who made me speak." Well, of course, immediately it was all stopped and the celebrations were arranged for the young man to marry the princess, which he did, and we know the end of the story. They got married and had many sons. You know, wisdom turned to luck and luck turned to wisdom. And you know, they became boon buddies after that. They began to work together, as well they should. But out of this arises a question, and with a little bit of a suggestion to start it off. From our own experiences of life, what words would we substitute for wisdom and luck? And besides that, what's your understanding of this story? What do these two represent in our life? What words would you use instead of wisdom and luck?
Awareness.
Pardon?
Awareness.
Yes.
And space, or awareness and trust.
How do they go together in your life?
Well, awareness is that sensitivity that there's so much more going on than what we can visually and sensually, I guess, take in. And faith is that part that is something about the energy force that you don't really maybe totally understand, but you know exists.
Okay.
I think at its base I would relate it to silence and movement.
Mhm.
Because in that silent space it's always wisdom.
Mhm.
And in the movement comes and goes, changes,
Mhm.
like love.
Yes.
Love and awareness.
Love and awareness. How do they go together?
Well, more love and action.
Aha.
Love and action.
Right. Okay.
Not the awareness, but
Yes.
having a love for something, but also the action to apply what it's needed to allow it to either be or to intervene when it's needed.
Aha. Yes. Good words.
I'll say knowledge and bliss.
Knowledge and bliss. Yeah. I can hear all the minds ticking over there.
I was going to say pie and sauce.
Well, I was probably gonna say pure old balls or just pure stupidity? Because we know how far the stupidity can take us.
Yes, we do too.
Especially with clients, self-nursing.